6:47 a.m., March 12, 2026, Nashville, Tennessee. 31 federal agents moved through the parking structure of a downtown office building on Commerce Street. Engines off, radios on encrypted channel. The vehicles, unmarked sedans and a pair of dark SUVs, had staged in the structure's lower level for 11 minutes before the coordinated signal. Agents checked weapons, reviewed breach assignments, confirmed radio clarity. The temperature was 38 degrees. Nobody spoke above a murmur. Estimated fraudulent claims, $18.7 million. 31 ghost veterans who never served a single day. The target was a suite on the 4th floor, a law office, or something that called itself one. At that exact moment, in 3 other cities, Jacksonville, San Diego, and Charlotte, identical formations were moving into position, 9 office locations, simultaneous entry. The operation had been building for 4 months. It started with 1 woman, 1 form, and 1 number that didn't belong. The Veterans Benefits Administration Processing Center in Nashville sits inside a federal building on Dederick Street, 2 blocks from the Capitol. It handles tens of thousands of disability and pension claims annually, paper files, electronic submissions, identity verification, cross-referencing. The work is procedural, methodical. Most examiners process 40 to 60 claims per shift. Most claims are exactly what they appear to be. In early November 2025, a contract examiner referred to in court documents only as Examiner R was assigned to a routine batch of incoming disability claims. She had worked in federal benefits verification for 11 years. She processed claims the way a surgeon reads an X-ray, systematically, with trained pattern recognition, looking for what doesn't fit. On November 6, 2025, she opened claim file number 4471D. The claimant stated he had served aboard USS Baton, a WASP-class amphibious assault ship. Combat injuries, deployment-related trauma, the DD-214, the certificate of release or discharge from active duty, looked standard. The format was correct. The signature blocks were populated. The service dates were legible. She cross-referenced the unit designation. It didn't match. USS Baton's deployment record for 2019 placed the ship in the Eastern Mediterranean. The unit designation on the DD-214 referenced a shore-based command in Rota, Spain, 2 different assignments. The claimant couldn't have served in both simultaneously. The discrepancy was small, the kind of thing that disappears in volume. But Examiner R stopped. She ran a secondary check on the Social Security number attached to the claim. The number had already been used. A different name, a different state. The same SSN had collected $340,000 in VA benefits since January 2024. 2 separate identities, 1 Social Security number. A statistical impossibility in a legitimate claims environment. She flagged the file and escalated it to the VA Office of Inspector General at 2:14 p.m. that afternoon. Before she closed her workstation for the day, she printed a copy of the file and the anomaly log and placed it in a physical case folder. 11 years of habit. She had learned not to rely on digital trails alone. What started as a single-flagged DD-214 would not stay small for long. The OIG assigned the case to Senior Special Agent Diane Caldwell, a 14-year veteran of federal benefits fraud investigations. Caldwell had worked financial crimes, identity theft, and benefits fraud across 4 field offices. She had seen forged paperwork before. She had seen duplicate Social Security numbers before. She had not seen this. Within 48 hours of receiving Examiner R's referral, Caldwell had pulled the SSN's full benefits history. The number appeared in 3 separate claim files across 2 VA regional offices, Nashville and San Diego. Each file had a different name attached. Each name had different personal details, different dates of birth, different home addresses, different service branches. 1 claimed Army Infantry. 1 claimed Navy. The 3rd listed Marine Corps. Same Social Security number. 3 different veterans. None of them real. Caldwell requested a full records pull from the Defense Manpower Data Center, the federal database that maintains military service records for all branches. The process normally takes several days. She flagged it priority. The results came back on November 11, 2025, Veterans Day. Of the 3 names attached to that Social Security number, only 1 appeared in military service records at all. And that person, a real former Navy petty officer named in court documents as Individual A, had never filed a VA claim in his life. He didn't know his discharge records had been copied. He didn't know his service data had been used as the template for 2 additional fraudulent identities. He was living in Jacksonville, Florida, working a civilian job, unaware that someone had built ghost veterans out of his paperwork. The detail that stuck with Caldwell: Individual A's original DD-214 had never been submitted to the VA at all. Whoever filed the fraudulent claims hadn't stolen his claim. They'd stolen his identity to fabricate claims for people who didn't exist. That was a different category of crime. Caldwell drove to Jacksonville 3 days later. She met with Individual A at his kitchen table, documents spread between them. He was 41 years old. He had served 8 years as a Navy engineman, finished his service in good standing, and moved on. He had a civilian job in marine equipment maintenance. He had a daughter starting college the following fall. He was, by every visible measure, living a quiet and unremarkable life. When Caldwell showed him the fraudulent filings bearing his unit designations and service dates, he went quiet for a long moment. He said he felt like his service had been turned into raw material, like the 8 years he'd given had been processed down to data points and handed to people who'd never stood a watch or pulled a duty roster in their lives. He asked Caldwell what he was supposed to do with that. She told him what she always told victims in cases like this. His records would be protected, his cooperation would matter, and the people responsible would be found. She meant all 3 things. She had been doing this long enough to know that meaning them didn't make them easier to deliver. Individual A agreed to cooperate fully. He provided originals of his DD-214 and all service documentation. He signed the necessary releases. When Caldwell left, he walked her to her car and shook her hand and said he hoped she got every last one of them. She told him she intended to. Caldwell contacted the FBI's Nashville field office on November 13, 2025. The case was assigned to Special Agent Marcus Webb, White Collar Crimes Division. Webb had spent 8 years working financial fraud, insurance schemes, payroll manipulation, contractor bid rigging. He understood how paper-based systems could be gamed by people who understood their architecture from the inside. Webb pulled the original VA claim file for the Baton case and read every line. The DD-214 forgery was competent, but not professional. Whoever made it understood the form's structure, but had made one operational error. They'd used a unit designation that existed, but wasn't assigned to that vessel during that deployment window. A detail only visible if you checked against deployment records that weren't part of the standard verification checklist. Webb's question: how many other claims in the same batch had the same error? Caldwell rescreened the full November intake. 7 more files had unit designation anomalies. All 7 carried social security numbers that had been used previously under different names. Combined fraudulent claims in those 7 files alone: $1.2 million. 8 forged identities in a single intake batch. That didn't happen by accident. That was production. Webb and Caldwell submitted a formal joint investigation request to the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit on November 18, 2025. The request was approved within 72 hours. IRS Criminal Investigation was brought in on November 21st, citing tax fraud implications tied to benefit disbursements. A joint task force was formally established: FBI, VAFYOG, and IRS CI. Designation: Operation Phantom Muster. The first operational priority was identifying the source of the forged DD-214s. Forging a DD-214 isn't simple. The form contains layered information: separation codes, character of discharge, pay grade, occupational specialty codes, re-enlistment eligibility. Getting those details coherent and internally consistent requires either military records experience or access to real service files that can be used as templates. The Baton forgery had been internally consistent in every respect except the unit designation. That level of quality pointed to someone who knew the form. Webb pulled the processing trail on the Baton claim, who submitted it, through which intake channel, what contact information appeared on the file. The claim had been submitted through a third-party veterans advocacy service. The paperwork listed an organization called Veterans Advocacy Partners LLC, based in Jacksonville, Florida. They had a website, a phone number, a physical address. They called themselves a paralegal firm specializing in veteran benefits applications. Webb ran the business registration. Veterans Advocacy Partners LLC had been incorporated in Florida in February 2024. Managing partner, a man named Gerald Dean Harlow. The LLC listed 3 satellite offices: Nashville, San Diego, and Charlotte, North Carolina. Caldwell ran Harlow's name through every military service database available. Gerald Dean Harlow had never served, not a single day. I spent time going through what the task force built in those first weeks, and one detail kept surfacing in every case summary. Harlow had incorporated Veterans Advocacy Partners 2 months after the VA updated its online claims portal to accept third-party representative filings without in-person identity verification. He knew the system. He waited until the window opened and walked through it. The task force began constructing the full operational model of Veterans Advocacy Partners. What emerged over the following weeks wasn't a simple forgery scheme. It was an industrial process. Here's what stuck with Special Agent Webb and his team looking at the full picture. This wasn't somebody making fake military records and hoping nobody noticed. This was a 3-city operation with a defined pipeline, division of labor, and what amounted to a client acquisition strategy. The pipeline worked in stages. Stage 1, recruitment. Veterans Advocacy Partners advertised in veteran community forums, social media groups, and on flyers posted near VA facilities in Jacksonville, Nashville, and San Diego. The pitch was straightforward. Let us handle your benefits application. No upfront cost. We take 15% of approved claims. The firm recruited real former service members. These individuals, referred to in the indictment collectively as participating veterans, voluntarily provided their discharge documentation to VAP, believing they were signing up for legitimate claims assistance. Stage 2, data extraction. Once VAP had a real DD-214 in hand, they didn't just use it to file the legitimate claimant's application. They photographed or digitized the document and extracted its core data, the service member's unit designation, deployment dates, separation codes, and occupational specialty. This information formed the template. Stage 3, identity fabrication. Using the extracted template data, VAP's in-house operation generated forged DD-214s for civilians, people with no military service at all. These ghost veterans were assigned new names and social security numbers, some harvested from other identity theft operations, some generated through other means the investigation was still tracing. The forged documents replicated the structure of the original DD-214 almost exactly, substituting the ghost veteran's fabricated identity while preserving the legitimate military service data underneath. Stage 4, claims submission. The fabricated identities were submitted as VA disability and pension claimants through the third-party portal. VAP received the benefit disbursements, paid to addresses they controlled, and distributed proceeds through a layered transfer system involving personal bank accounts, shell business accounts, and wire transfers to accounts in 3 states. The real former service member whose DD-214 had been copied, they received their legitimate claim as well, filed correctly, approved through normal channels. They had no idea their service record had been duplicated. In some cases, the real claimant received benefits approval before they even knew their paperwork had been submitted. VAP handled everything. That was the pitch. That was the trap. 31 ghost veterans had been created this way since early 2024. Total fraudulent claims submitted, $18.7 million. Total paid out before the investigation began, approximately $11.3 million. Now, here's what the task force had to figure out. With that much money moving, and that many fraudulent identities in the system, how deep did this go? What do you think? Did the VA's third-party filing system create this vulnerability? Or was fraud always inevitable the moment that portal went live? Drop your answer in the comments. We read them all. The task force expanded its subpoena scope in December 2025. Financial records from 5 banks. Lease agreements for the 4 office locations. The VAP website's hosting records and payment processor accounts. Email archives obtained through search warrant from the Jacksonville office's registered business address. What the email archives showed changed the shape of the investigation. Veterans Advocacy Partners had not built its forgery infrastructure alone. The email records, spanning February 2024 through November 2025, contained correspondence with 2 outside contractors. One was a document production service operating under a business name in San Diego. The other was a data broker, an individual, not a company, based in Charlotte, North Carolina. The data broker's role, sourcing social security numbers. The document production service's role, Physical fabrication of the forged DD-214s, printed on appropriate paper stock, formatted to pass visual inspection. The operation had subcontractors. It had vendors. It was structured like a business because it was one. Special Agent Webb noted in case documents that what surprised him most about the VAP model wasn't the scale, it was the division of risk. Harlow and his associates never touched the actual document forgery process themselves. They outsourced the most criminally exposed element of the scheme to contractors who could, in theory, be described as providing document production services. The email correspondence was careful. Words like template and formatted copy appeared frequently. The word forgery did not appear once in 31 months of records. Most people assume white-collar fraud rings stay small because participants fear exposure. The evidence in this case tells a different story. VAP scaled specifically because Harlow compartmentalized. The contractors didn't know the full scope. The recruited veterans didn't know they were being used as templates. The ghost veterans obviously didn't exist. The only people who understood the complete picture were Harlow and two associates identified in court documents as co-conspirators 1 and 2. The task force identified co-conspirator 1 as a paralegal named in the indictment. She had worked in VA claims processing for 7 years before leaving federal employment in 2023. She understood the system from the inside. She knew what examiners looked for. She knew what passed and what flagged. Her role within VAP was quality control, reviewing forged DD-214s before submission to ensure they would clear standard verification checks. She had missed the unit designation error on the baton file. One mistake. 11 years of fraud investigation experience. One flagged file. 4 months later, 31 arrests across 4 cities. The task force spent December 2025 and January 2026 building the arrest package. Surveillance was established on all 4 VAP offices. The Jacksonville location, VAP's operational headquarters, where Harlow worked, received the heaviest coverage. A fixed surveillance post was established in a commercial space across the street from the building. Agents monitored entry and exit patterns, documented staff movements, and identified all individuals with regular access to the facility. The surveillance team logged Harlow's routine with granular precision. He arrived each morning in a gray Honda Pilot, parking in the same spot in the adjacent surface lot. He carried a briefcase, but rarely a bag. He took lunch at 12:30, usually at one of 2 restaurants within walking distance of the office, a sandwich counter, and a Vietnamese place on the next block. He left between 5:40 and 6:15 p.m. On Fridays, he left earlier. On the 3rd Thursday of each month, he drove directly from the office to a bank branch 7 blocks away and stayed for 15 to 20 minutes. The task force noted those visits and pulled the corresponding transaction records. The amounts varied, but the pattern was consistent. Structured transfers designed to stay below federal reporting thresholds. On January 9, 2026, a problem emerged. The investigation had a leak. Not a confirmed leak, a behavioral anomaly. Harlow's pattern shifted. He had been arriving at the Jacksonville office between 8:30 and 9:15 a.m. every weekday for 8 months of surveillance records. On January 9th, he arrived at 6:50 a.m. He stayed for 40 minutes. He left, carrying a laptop bag that he did not normally carry. He drove to a UPS store 3 miles from the office. He did not go back to the office that day. Webb convened an emergency case review. 2 possibilities. Harlow was adjusting his routine for unrelated reasons, or someone had warned him. The task force ran a security audit of all personnel with access to Operation Phantom muster case materials. 17 people total, all cleared. No communication anomalies detected. The audit took 11 days and found nothing actionable. Meanwhile, Harlow's behavior normalized. He returned to his regular schedule on January 14th. The laptop he had carried to the UPS store was never definitively identified. Webb's assessment: Harlow had likely received a non-specific warning, possibly through the document production contractor in San Diego, who had his own exposure concerns, and had moved sensitive materials out of the office as a precaution. He hadn't run. He'd hedged. The task force decided the timeline needed to compress. Here's a take that'll probably draw some argument. Moving forward with incomplete visibility on the San Diego contractor was the right call, even though it meant going in without full intelligence on the document production operation. Waiting for a complete picture would have given Harlow time to transfer more assets, warn more co-conspirators, or make a move that burned the case entirely. Sometimes partial information and a hard deadline beats complete information and a closed door. The arrest operation was set for March 12, 2026. The arrest warrant package covered 17 individuals across 4 cities. Harlow, co-conspirator 1. Co-conspirator 2, the San Diego document production contractor, identified as a man operating a print and document services business. The Charlotte data broker, 12 additional VAP employees and associates identified through financial records, email evidence, and surveillance as having knowingly participated in the fraud operation. Coordinating simultaneous arrests across 4 cities required 4 separate SWAT-assisted entry teams, synchronized by a command cell in Nashville, operating on encrypted communication. The Jacksonville team was largest, 8 agents with SWAT support, targeting Harlow personally. Nashville, San Diego, and Charlotte each had teams of 6. The timeline, 6:47 a.m. local time, simultaneous entry across all 9 locations. Pre-entry intelligence had identified a complication at the San Diego location. The document production business operated out of a commercial suite that shared a building with 12 other tenants. Building management had not been contacted in advance to avoid information security risk. The building's access control system used key fob entry, and the task force did not have fob access. Agents would need to wait for natural building traffic or breach the exterior entrance. A visible action in a populated commercial district at 6:47 in the morning. At 6:44 a.m., a building maintenance worker arrived for his shift and swiped in. The San Diego entry team was through the exterior door behind him before it closed. 3 minutes later, the operation went live across all 4 cities simultaneously. In Nashville, the Commerce Street team made entry to the VAP office suite on the 4th floor at 6:51 a.m. 2 employees were already present, early arrivals. They were instructed to sit and were not handcuffed. Neither was a named defendant. The office manager, a named co-conspirator, arrived at 7:02 a.m. and was taken into custody in the elevator lobby before reaching the office door. She said nothing. She looked at the badge extended toward her, looked past it at the open office door where agents were already moving through filing cabinets, and looked back at the badge. She put her hands behind her back without being told. In Jacksonville, Harlow was arrested at his residence at 6:48 a.m. He answered the door in a bathrobe. He did not resist. He said nothing. In San Diego, the document production contractor, named in court documents as Philip Garrett, was found in his back office, surrounded by a production run. On the work surface in front of him, 17 printed DD-214s, all blank, awaiting the identity information that would be inserted during the fabrication step. The printer was still warm. In Charlotte, the data broker, identified only as Individual C in initial court filings, was not at his registered address. A second address identified through utility records was checked. He was located there at 7:21 a.m., 34 minutes after the primary wave of arrests. He was the last defendant taken into custody that morning. 17 arrests, all named defendants in federal custody by 9 a.m. Eastern. The post-arrest search of the Jacksonville headquarters produced 3 additional laptops, 12 external hard drives, and a printed records archive covering every claim VAP had submitted since February 2024. The archive was organized by date, by filing office, and by claimed benefit category. It was, in effect, a complete operational record of 31 ghost veteran identities and $18.7 million in fraudulent claims. Harlow had kept records, meticulous records. The same organizational discipline that made the scheme scalable also created the evidentiary foundation that would dismantle it. Put yourself in Examiner R's position for a moment. November 6, 2025. She's processing her 40th claim of the shift. The DD-214 looks fine. Everything looks fine except one unit designation that she cross-references out of habit, out of training, out of the particular attention that 11 years of this work builds without announcement. She makes one additional check. The SSN doesn't match. She flags it. She couldn't have known what she was looking at. She couldn't have known it connected to 3 cities and 31 identities. She just knew the number was wrong. That's the line between $11.3 million paid out and $18.7 million paid out. One examiner, one number, one cross-reference. The indictment returned by a federal grand jury on March 17, 2026, listed 23 federal counts across 17 defendants. Charges included conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, conspiracy to defraud the United States, false statements to a federal agency, and money laundering. Gerald Dean Harlow faced 13 of those counts individually. The maximum exposure under federal sentencing guidelines, over 40 years. A criminal information filed separately against the Charlotte data broker, Individual C, indicated he had agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors. The cooperation agreement suggested his testimony would extend the investigation into the SSN sourcing pipeline, where those social security numbers came from, how they were acquired, from what compromised databases or prior identity theft schemes, remained an open investigative thread as of the date of this documentary. The participating veterans, the real former service members whose DD-214s had been copied without their knowledge, were not charged. The VA confirmed that their legitimate benefit claims would be reviewed and processed. Several had never received benefits they were entitled to because VAP had diverted their applications into the fraud pipeline, submitted the legitimate claim late, or in 4 cases, failed to submit it at all. They were used twice, first as templates, then as waiting claimants whose cases sat in a pile while Harlow's operation collected disbursements on their behalf. Comment here: does a 20-year federal sentence, what guidelines suggest Harlow faces, reflect what was done to those veterans? We see both sides of that argument, and we're not sure there's a clean answer. As of June 2026, pretrial hearings are ongoing. No trial date has been set. The cooperation agreement with Individual C is still active. The SSN sourcing pipeline has not been fully mapped. Of the $11.3 million paid out before the investigation began, federal prosecutors have identified and frozen approximately $6.8 million in assets. $4.5 million has not been recovered. It moved through accounts that no longer exist, into transfers that cross state lines, and in at least 2 traced instances, international wires. Where that money went, investigators have said publicly, may never be fully known. The VA has announced internal reviews of its third-party filing portal and the identity verification procedures applied to DD-214 documentation submitted by representative services. What specific changes will be implemented, and when, has not been publicly detailed. Philip Garrett, the San Diego document production contractor arrested with 17 blank DD-214s in front of him, has entered a not guilty plea. His attorney has argued that his client provided printing services without knowledge of their ultimate use. The printer was still warm. If you want to know what the investigation found when they traced the SSN pipeline further, where those ghost identities were actually sourced from, and how many other schemes may have used the same data broker, subscribe. That thread is still moving, and when it closes, we'll cover it. The network is dismantled. The VA portal that made it possible is still running, and somewhere in the data, 31 ghost veterans still exist as records. The system that created them is still intact.